And just to go ahead and get started, as you guys probably know, we're going to go through a couple of more advanced topics here in this webinar versus the last webinar we had on the basic F9 concepts. And my name is Kevin Hughes. I'm with the Productivity Solutions team here at DMFI. And I've got Randy Krauser, one of our F9 and support experts here as well. And he's going to do the vast majority of the presentation. But I did want to take just a minute and go through a really quick review of some of the things that we did last time in the basic webinar, just so you guys have an idea of where we're starting. And we're not going to go through and demonstrate all these, but I want to make sure everybody knows exactly what we did on the last webinar, just in case you couldn't make it to that one. We talked about a variety of different ways to build and manipulate a financial report. We started with the account ranges, as you can see, with those two dots in between 1,000 and 1,010 there in my example. That'll take every account from 1,000 to 1,010 inclusive and include those. And if you put a comma after that, then you can also singularly include account 2,000. So that way we have a range, and we also have a single account that it's going to look at and give us a financial report result from the F9 database, including all of those accounts in that range, along with 2,000 as well. We also talked about GL versus NGL formulas. As you probably recall, GL is kind of the base formula of F9. A lot of times when you build everything, it's going to be a GL formula. If we use an NGL formula or negative GL formula, I believe, that just reverses the sign. So if we want a credit balance to appear differently or a debit balance to appear differently on our report, we can use an NGL formula. It'll just reverse the sign so that negatives appear positive or credits appear like debits and vice versa if we're looking at a display on a report for liabilities versus assets or something like that. We also talked about ways to format your financial report using a sheet or a tab in Excel for kind of control cells. That way we can just make a change of period once and it'll update everything. If we want to change a year, if we want to go ahead and name those control cells, so instead of pointing to a different tab and having a big long formula, if we can just call it year or period or budget or actual, those types of things. And we talked about how to name cells in Excel. We did also produce a little bit of a handout after the last session. If you didn't see that in your email and you want to take a look at that, you can certainly let us know and we can forward that over to you later this afternoon if you need it. We also went through very quickly some Excel formulas to verify our reports are in balance. We did one to compare the top and the bottom of the balance sheet to make sure that everything worked out well and the sheet was in balance. We also had a piece of the P&L we compared to the balance sheet to make sure that those two were in balance across different financial reports. We also had the F9 Analyze feature, which is over there on the right side of the screen, the little picture that I have over there. The main way a lot of customers use that is as it shows there, how many times do you use those accounts on a particular report, that one for the P&L. You know, there's some accounts that we use twice, which is expected, and some at the bottom that are shaded that are used 4 times. So it looks like we're duplicating some accounts on that particular report. And Analyze will also tell us if we are excluding certain accounts that we might want to include on a report and give us a full rundown of that using the Analyze function, which is very quick and pretty easy to use. And we recommend for most of our customers to try and do some troubleshooting using that Analyze function. We also have some zero suppress options for rows and columns. We also have the drill down as pictured there at the bottom of the screen, so we can start to see, you know, in that account number 4,000 across all branches, all departments. There's one of those that's a debit balance and 3 that are a credit balance, so we can start to see if that's something we expect or if that's why our numbers might be off on that sheet. And last thing we talked about in our basic session was about Excel recalculation, about the different ways to do that. We have F9 for the basic Excel recalculation that most of you use. We have a way to force every single cell and every single Excel tab to recalculate with Control-Alt-Shift F9 all at the same time. Also, if we just want to recalculate the current sheet or the current tab within Excel that we're on, we can just do Shift F9 for that. And lastly, if we just want to recalculate the cell that we're working on, we can highlight the cell and double-click it, or just highlight a cell, hit F2, and then hit Enter, and it'll just recalculate that one cell. So depending on what you're trying to do, there's a few different ways that we can recalculate just to make sure you don't waste a lot of time if it takes a long time to recalculate your financial report. So with that, that's pretty much the basics of our basics webinar from last time, I suppose. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Randy here, and he can go through some of the more advanced topics here for this webinar.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Today, the main topic we're going to be discussing is the use of budgets in F9. And as we discuss budgets, we'll also be looking at some related functionality, but in most cases, they're all going to tie back to the use of budgets in one way or another. As we go through this, you'll also notice that we do utilize some of the basic features that Kevin just described. The sources of data for budgets are from several areas. One is the ability to maintain your budget data in Agility. And from Agility, then you can use the GL export and export that budget data and translate it into your F9 database. When you're in Agility and you run that export, there's a field that asks if you want to export actual data or budget. You just select that budget option. If you have multiple budgets, you would select the name of the budget that you actually want to export. Other than that, the export and translate function is the same as exporting and translating your actual data. But when people have F9 and do their financial reporting in F9, they will generally maintain their budget data outside of Agility in an Excel spreadsheet. From that spreadsheet, you manipulate your budget numbers, and when you're satisfied with them, you use the budget write-back feature and push that information into the F9 database, and then at that point, your F9 formulas in your financial statements can pull that data from the F9 database. We're also going to be looking at the chart feature from F9. This feature has multiple uses. You can have a general review of data that exists in the F9 database. You could use it to pull a chart of accounts from F9. You could pull a trial balance. When you do pull that data, it pulls the dollar amounts as static dollar amounts. It does not pull and create formulas the way the F9 report writer does. And then one large use of the chart feature is to create the initial budget spreadsheet to use to maintain your budget data. And we'll look in a minute and see how that's done. But to begin with, I'm going to switch over to Excel and just take a quick look at that chart feature. In Excel, when you have F9, you would click on the F9 option, menu option at the top. And in the ribbon, we have the chart option. Will pop up here in a moment. Actually, I'm going to close this real quick and go to a blank worksheet. And then select chart. And it shows that we're going to be pulling data from the Webinar 3 F9 database, a lot of times referred to as the BTR file. It shows what type of data we're going to be pulling, whether it's budget or actual. I'm going to switch this to actual. And I'm going to pull from 2014. You can select the year you want to pull data from. They ask if you want to include the general ledger account code, the account description, the account source, whether it's a balance sheet or a P&L account. You also have an option asking if you want to have your statements pulled in separate columns in Excel. And for this first example, I'm going to select that and say yes, we do. You have a couple more options: skip accounts with zeros or prepend accounts with a quote. We'll leave those unchecked. And then you can select the range of accounts that you want the chart to pull. Asterisks are wildcards, and they represent all values. I'm going to say that our first segment of branch, we're going to pull all branches. The second segment is department. We're going to pull from all departments. And then the third segment is account numbers, and we're just going to pull the account numbers that start with 70. And then the asterisk at the end indicates we're going to get all accounts that start with 70. For the periods, you can select any range of periods that you want. You can use the period wizard to generate your period variable. I'll just say we're going to pull the month one activity, the change of value for month one. Once your options are selected, you select find. And it shows that these conditions pulled 31 accounts, and they wrote that information to the clipboard. So that's in the clipboard, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK and close the chart, and then paste from the clipboard into my spreadsheet. And you can see we have the first line showing the database that the information came from, the year, the type, currency. And for our account number, we have the account segments in separate columns. This can be useful if you want to sort this information by a particular account segment. And then we have description, origin, and dollar amount. If I click on one of those dollar amounts in the formula bar, you can see that is a static dollar amount. It's not an F9 formula that got pulled. As I scroll down, you can see that we did actually get all the accounts that start with 70. So that would be a quick little report on the fly that you could build just to review your, in this example, salary, payroll information. We're going to look at how this chart function can be used in conjunction with F9. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint for a moment first, and we'll look at a few other details regarding the budget write-back feature before we get into that the example. When you do a budget write-back, you can write back budget data for balance sheet accounts and for P&L accounts, but they have to be done separately with two separate write-backs. They cannot be done all at once. When you have your budget data in a spreadsheet, that spreadsheet has to be laid out in a specific way with specific column headings. In that spreadsheet, when you're entering dollar amounts, you'd enter those as positive dollars and credit amounts as negatives. So your revenue accounts and liability accounts would be negative. Once your data is entered, you would highlight the range of accounts in that spreadsheet, including the headings that you want to write back to F9, and then select the budget write back option. Verify the options that are selected in that pop-up window, and then do the write back, and then your budget data will be written to the F9 database. Then at that point, it's available to be pulled into your financial statements. One other thing we'll be discussing in a minute is the fact that you can create multiple budgets and write multiple budgets back to the F9 database. In our slideshow, we're saying budgets and forecasts. Forecasts could be situations where you're considering a variety of payroll changes, or maybe a purchase or opening of a new branch. Those types of scenarios where you want to see how those different possibilities would impact your financial statements. So you could set up a forecast for each of those scenarios. If you do write multiple budgets back to the database, you can use the F9 list feature to get a list of the budget names that have been used. And we'll also discuss the idea of using multiple F9 databases, multiple BTR files, to store your F9 data in. We'll go back to our spreadsheet example. I'm going to open a new blank spreadsheet. We do have a tab already existing with some budget data in the correct format. You can see we have the account numbers, descriptions, columns for every accounting period, and we have every general ledger account in here. And obviously, to build this by hand would be very, very time consuming. But by using the chart feature, we'll build that very quickly. You select chart, the database you're going to pull data from, the year you're going to pull data from. We're going to pull actual data. When you're setting up your data for budgets, for the budget write-back, you do need to include the account code, description, and origin. But your general ledger account needs to be all in one column, so we're going to unselect having segments of the accounts in separate columns. You could create budget spreadsheets for example, for each branch or specific types of expense accounts, etc., and have multiple spreadsheets that you could write back into the F9 database. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to pull all accounts into one spreadsheet, and I want all 12 accounting periods. So I'm going to click on the Periods button and get the Period Wizard. I'm going to tell it I want all periods. Send that to the clipboard. Close the chart and paste that data into my spreadsheet. I'm going to back up once and go through that one more time. I missed. Before I do that, find, well, actually that's the part that I missed. I forgot to click on the Find button. I'm going to click on Apply for these conditions and then click on Find to find all the accounts that meet this criteria. And this time it found 329 accounts. So now I will close and paste the results. And here we essentially have a duplicate of that first example that I showed you. We have all the data, account numbers all in one column, all the segments in one column, the description, the origin, and a column for each accounting period. And the format for doing the budget write-back does not require this first row of data. I'm going to delete that. And it requires specific column headings for the accounting periods. You need the number of the period, a space, and the word budget. I'm going to drag that over for all 12 accounting periods. And it updates the numerical value of 2, 3, 4 for each period up through 12. So now we have the correct format for doing our budget write-back. Now, as I mentioned, we can only do balance sheet or P&L accounts at a time, one at a time. I'm going to select the entire worksheet and click on the Excel data button, put a filter on these columns. Under the origin, I'm just going to look at this point at P&L accounts. This is just one example of how these filters can be used. And I'll say that I want to set up budget information for just branch 30. I could manually select all the GL accounts for branch 30, or I can use this text filter, and I'll say I want branch 30, all departments, and all accounts. I'll say OK, yes. And I said all accounts for branch 30, but since our origin is filtered to P&L, we're just getting the P&L accounts for branch 30. And you can see all these accounts start with branch 30. We have sales, cost of goods, and our expense accounts, which is a more manageable list than looking at all the accounts for all the branches all at once. So this pulls the actual data for these accounting periods for each account, and that could be your starting point for establishing budgets. I'm just going to arbitrarily key in some budget information. And I'll just use that same amount for these first 5 periods. And I'll key in an amount for cost of goods sold. Drag that over. This one, grab that one. And as I mentioned before, credit activity needs to be entered as a negative. Debit activity needs to be entered as a positive. Revenue accounts are credit, so I enter that as a negative, and the debit for cost of goods sold is a positive. So I'm just going to work with that for budget write-back at this point. I'll highlight those cells that I want to write back to the F9 database, including the column headings. Go back to the F9 menu, select budget write-back. We're going to write back to the Webinar 3 database, and you can type in the budget type that you want it to go back with. I'll just go with the basic budget, and I'm going to write that back to 2014. And then you would need to select whether these are P&L accounts or balance sheet accounts. And in this case, they are P&L accounts. Select the right button. I think that defaulted back for me to actual.
And one other question we had too, Randy, since we did highlight starting in row number 1, right. we also caught 100 and some of those hidden rows that we have that we filtered out. We don't know if it's going to, do we know if it'll take those rows or not when we bring that back?
It's only going to do a write back for the rows that are displaying.
Okay.
It's not going to write back all those other rows that are hidden.
Okay.
I'm going to put budget in here again. I think when I clicked on something else and made this default back to actual. Now I'll click on write, and it says the budget write back was successful.
And the good news is it doesn't allow us to write back to actual because it doesn't want us to write back actual values, right?
Correct. You do not want to overwrite your actual data with budget data. And you saw with that error that popped up that account type of actual is reserved and did not let us write the budget back using that type of actual. And then also on here we have some visual confirmation that it only wrote back data for 3 accounts. It did not write the 100 and some hidden rows that are in the spreadsheet. Click on OK. And at that point, your budget data has been written back to the F9 database. I'm going to go over to the P&L account, or tab here in the spreadsheet, and we'll see how that information now gets pulled onto one of your financial statements. In this example, we have a column for year-to-date May actual activity and year-to-date May budget activity. And the difference between these two are in the formula for each. When I clicked on the budget number, the budget formula is showing, and it shows the account type of type BUD. If I click on an actual formula, the account type is type ACT. And these are a couple of the named cells that Kevin described how to use named cells as control variables in F9 spreadsheets. So our budget data is going to look at the type. The formulas are going to look at the type of data to determine whether we're pulling actual or budget. I'm going to do an F9 here to recalculate. And you can see that our budget shows $2,375,000. But that's not the budget amount that I keyed in and wrote back to the system. So I'm going to use another feature here, the drill down feature, and just take a closer look at that budget number. And pulled in that account. We'll look at the whole account and hit the drill button. And we can see that my $500,000 of budget that I just entered and wrote back is in there under branch 30. The rest of that dollar amount was previously entered into the database under branch 20. So that number we're seeing is actually a combination of branch 30 and branch 20 budget information. We could adjust our financial statement to only include one branch or another, but at this point we're including all branches. So that's an example of how you can use that drill down feature to verify what you have written back and what you're actually looking at there. And while we're talking about these named cells, I happen to know where this named cell is located in the spreadsheet, the type BUD. But what if you had forgotten where that was located and where it had to be maintained? Or what if you're using a spreadsheet that someone else designed and built and you really don't know where they put these named cells at? In order to find out what that named value is pointing to, you can click on the Excel Formulas tab and go to Name Manager. And then we'll list all of your named cells in alphabetical order, and we'll just scroll down, and at the bottom we have type BUD and type ACT. Type BUD is pointing to the tab named Control Data, cell E7. Type ACT is on the tab named Control Data, cell C7. So that's a quick reference as to where that's being maintained at. So I'll go over to the left here to our tab called Control Data. And there we have it in C7 is our actual value, and it's named type ACT. And here's E7 for budget, and it's named type BUD. And that's how we're controlling the two different columns in our spreadsheet. We have two different type control cells, one for actual and one for budget, and those are being utilized in the formulas for each column. I go back to the F9 menu for a moment and just pull up that budget write back window and discuss a couple of other topics here. I did write this back to the year 2014, but at this point in the year, August, you're probably not compiling budgets for the year 2014 anymore. You're probably working on budgets for the year 2015. And you can create spreadsheets with that 2015 budget information and write it back to a future year. And it will go into the F9 database with that appropriate year. I just used also the basic type of budget. Okay. You can write back to multiple budgets, and to do that, you would just give it a different name. And it would write back with an account type of budget 2 in this case to the F9 database. And then in your control cell on the financial statements under control tab, you would reference budget 2 instead of budget. One other topic is the idea of writing your F9 data to multiple files, to multiple databases. Again, those are what we refer to as the BTR files. That is possible. A lot of people maintain all of their F9 data in one database. That would include the data for multiple accounting years, multiple budget years, multiple account types, all in one file. But you could have a separate file for each actual set of data for each year and each budget set of data for each year. In some cases, if you're working with a very large chart of accounts, or maybe you have a lot of years of history, by segregating that data in separate files, it can potentially improve your performance, lessen the amount of time needed to recalculate your spreadsheets, because it's going through just a limited number of years, a limited number of types, instead of all the history in one file. If you do that, you do have to design your spreadsheets to reference that data from multiple files. So here, in the same way that we have multiple fields for different types of data, you would have multiple fields for different database file names. We have just this one control field for our Webinar 3 database. You would have to set up multiple fields, one for each database that you want to pull data from, and then adjust your F9 formulas to appropriately refer back to the correct data file. One other topic related to budgets, and I'm speaking from a personal experience, I was setting up multiple budgets and trying to pull the data back from one of those, and I wasn't getting the data that I thought had written back successfully. It looked like it had written back successfully. So I wanted to look into the F9 database to see if that budget name existed. So I used the list feature. And I've been writing back to the year 2015. So I just generated a list of budgets. Sent that to the clipboard. Pasted that into my spreadsheet. And I had a list of the budget names that existed in the database. And by looking at the names, I realized I had named it something different from what I thought I did. And then I was able to adjust accordingly, and that data did pull correctly into my spreadsheet.
Yeah, one question that we did have here that I can restate for everyone is maybe we talked about ways to bring information out of either a spreadsheet or out of Agility into F9. And the other question here came up, can we bring things back from F9 back into Agility from a budget standpoint? And I don't know if that's possible. Is it, Randy?
No, there's not a way to import budget data into Agility. There's no type of import for the Agility budget fields. That is pretty much a manual process of keying those numbers into Agility.
And at the same point, if you already have, like you already had a budget amount in F9, if you did another budget write back or another import of a budget, would it overwrite what was in there already for the same account?
Yes, that's correct. Every time you do a budget write back for a particular accounting period and particular account, that dollar amount gets overwritten each time you do a budget write back for that period and account number. So one last topic we're going to look at is the use of statistical analysis with your F9 financial reports. And this essentially is going to combine data from an Excel spreadsheet with your data from the F9 database. Examples would be if you want to see averages of revenue per employee or maybe expenses per truck or per warehouse type of calculation. You can maintain those statistics in the spreadsheet and combine those with the data being pulled from F9. In our example, we set it up to actually be able to enter some projected statistics and then also some actual statistics. And once those are set up, we maintain those in our control cells, and we use the naming of those cells for easy reference throughout the workbook. Going back to Excel here, in our example, we set up this data on our control data tab. They could be set up on a tab of their own separately, and once the cells get named, those named cells can be pulled anywhere throughout the workbook. So here we have projected and actual variance for each month of the year. We have some formulas to calculate averages, or monthly averages. And on these actual fields, you can see that we have these named. This one's abbreviated for January employees. Moving over, we have February employees, March employees, etc. Over at the end, we have AVEE for average employees. And the same thing, we have trucks. We have January trucks, February trucks, etc. If these were on a separate worksheet, you could include cells on your control tab, as we did here, which are referencing those named cells. So you could pull from the other sheet onto your control tab and still have visibility for those values. Our P&L statement, over a bit. And we have a couple of columns for statistic use per employee, per truck. And these are Excel formulas referencing back to our actual data divided by our named cell of average employees and dividing by this column average trucks. So that's just one example of how statistics could be used in F9.
All right, and I think that is just about all we had on the advanced webinar here today. And I would encourage everybody here, as it shows, we do have a third webinar that we have for new features in version 5. There we'll go into some detail on scheduling tasks within F9 and doing that to automate some reporting and some other functions, emailing, sharing reports, recalculating reports, those types of things. And we'll also go into great detail on user security. It's a new feature in version 5. And it's a nice way to hide certain accounts or branches or departments so that when users recalculate a sheet, they can't see those particular accounts. So we can certainly show you how that functions on the front end, and we'll get into some of that back end setup as well and give you guys a good understanding of how to use that within your organization. So with that, we will go ahead and stay on here for a few more minutes. If you have some other questions and want to go ahead and chat those to us, you're certainly welcome to do so. Otherwise, that pretty much ends our content here for today. We do appreciate you guys attending the webinar today, and we'll be happy to answer any other questions that you have via chat, or you can follow up with us offline, and we'll go from there. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.